Adi. It's that time of the week where we discuss Ukraine. Although I've done a little bit of a video with General Shaukin Chauhan, there are some news which is coming out of Ukraine that tells us something is brewing with the Russians. We need to find out what is happening with the Russians. Are they going to go on an offensive, or is this going to be a show of force that the Russians would do against the Ukrainians? A lot of movements by President Putin towards his army commanders, towards Belarus, as a matter of fact, where he is today. And we need to now interpret the news that is coming out of Ukraine to figure out what's going to happen, what's the future course, and how will this war, if it does in the next recent times, come to a certain conclusion. Before I start, and I've, as usual, got some slides for you guys so that we can actually discuss this whole thing. I'd like to request all of you, please, the second you join in, like this video, subscribe. Thank you so much for all of you guys who've been spreading the word about this particular channel. I've been getting new requests and new people joining in very, almost every day. So as I said, subscribe, hit the bell icon so that you get the notifications of a show which is pretty much every night, except of course on Sunday, which was last one because of the football. But the next one we're going to have one. So yes, and if you can, please do contribute to the Dev Talks efforts. Thank you so much to all of you guys who've actually helped me out till now, and I assure you to be able to continue producing the kind of content that I am with facts, sans the rhetoric, just for you guys at Dev Talks. So let's get into it. What's happening with the Ukraine war? It's almost 300 odd days. The war, it's kind of in a, if you look at it from a broader perspective, it looks like it's in a standstill. Lot of small things happening at the background which we need to analyze. These little incidents, when you join them together, as I like to do in all my shows, give you a broader picture of what might happen. Might. I'm an analyst who's trying to join 2 plus 2 to make 4, 6, and 8. Maybe yes, maybe wrong. The choice is on you to kind of listen, understand, research, and make form your opinions. And of course, on President Putin, who's going to take some steps in the near very future, or at least that's what the hints are telling us. Let's get into the presentation to realize what's happening around, what is the news, and let's figure out how we can kind of interpret what's going to happen. Now, the first one I want to talk about is an interesting little thing, and I put this across in the first go because I wanted to talk about Poland for a little bit. Now, Poland supports Georgia's desire to become a member of the EU and NATO. This is mentioned by the Polish president, Duda. Now, the interesting thing here is Poland is kind of, if I may, help all the Indians understand, is Poland is kind of the Pakistan of Europe, where the Afghanistan is Ukraine. So Poland has all the ways of all the weapons and everything that is happening from the West is going into Poland and getting filtered out, not getting filtered, but getting into Ukraine. Polish troops are fighting there. Poland, for some reason, has a lot of interest in this area. A lot of people attribute it to their history with the Russians, not the Russians, but the Soviets. But I guess it's a lot more. The innate hatred for the Russians has been drilled up in their society quite a lot. Uh, this is the second part is interesting. This was mentioned by the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban. He seems to be the voice of sanity within the European Union, and he said President Macron is right. The price of war between Russia and Ukraine is not the same on either side of the Atlantic. If you guys go back to my previous episodes, for some of you who've not seen them, I had very clearly mentioned about Macron not very happy with the way that the US has been selling them liquefied natural gas at higher prices than what US is selling it to its own citizens. He says further, if we want the European industry to survive, now this is not growth, this is not development, we are talking about, let me say this word slowly, survival. We must solve our European energy crisis quickly. It's time to reconsider the sanctions. Now, this has been said in multiple forums with multiple people. John Mersheimer, Henry Kissinger recently wrote an article and he said, this is it. We need to stop. There has to be a negotiated peace. He gave certain uh, you know, uh, thoughts of his. Of course, he's the architect of a lot of crises in the world. It's interesting that he's putting his thoughts to kind of curtail this crisis. But anyways, he gave certain thoughts to tell us what should actually happen in Ukraine. Uh, Besides the point that I want to talk about is, and why I write is Mother Merkel. Mother Merkel was this loving figure, as what was made us to believe, who welcomed all the refugees into Germany, who welcomed anybody who wanted to come into Germany, gave an interview recently to German media and said the Minsk agreements that were signed in 2015, another one I think in 2017-18, were signed to give time to Ukraine to basically strengthen up its arms forces. We now know for certain, and this is something that the Russians have been talking about for the past 10 months, is the factor that the Ukrainians have been building their defenses all over the front line of Ukraine for the past 8 years. So, when we are talking about Minsk, which is the first one that happened in 2015, we have now clear evidence of NATO support to Ukraine with regards building up its army, and that is something that Angela Merkel very clearly spelled out. It is also interesting to realize that the Germany today also says that no ceasefire should be attained on Russian terms. So the person in the chancellery has changed, but the terms are pretty much the same. Interestingly, Angela Merkel also mentioned something that by the end of her presidency, even if her heart desired to change certain things within the Minsk agreement and kind of come to some sort of an understanding with Russia, she couldn't, because the President Putin would not take her seriously, because she was pretty much at the end of her term, and she has said she's not going to fight anymore. Now, I don't know why she's actually given this interview, why she said all these little things, but it tells me, is she creating a little space for herself in the future of the German politics? I am not sure whether she's trying to make a comeback. That's something that we'll need to keep a watch out. If she does, then we will actually come back to this particular interview, and you can say, why did she give this interview? Is because you're trying to build a public perception. Germany, to me, is the most important country, and the reactions within Germany are the most critical. There have been massive protests in Germany, in Hamburg, in northern and southern Germany, as a matter of fact, with regards to getting out of NATO. And that's what the people are asking for. It's an interesting case study, because the Germans, if they switch, European Union pretty much will not have much of a choice after that. Another big news that came out is that the US wants to increase the number of its troops in Ukraine to strengthen control over the supplied weapons and assist in use of critical systems. What that tells you is the US is going to send advisors, which is what we've heard right from the days of Vietnam, into Ukraine, trying to teach or trying to actually operate the systems, the high end systems like the HIMARS and stuff like that. I am for certain going to put my money on the factor that these HIMARS systems that US has supplied Ukraine are being operated by either uniformed and serving US army forces or armed forces, or serving without uniformed armed forces, something of the sort, or some sort of a contractor business under a private military contractor or something like that. But it is being operated. So here is a confirmation for you. UK also says that we are going to send in more troops. I will give you a little more details in the next slide. But this is interesting. Both of them have decided to actually go forward. If there are two countries that are pushing for this war to go forward, it is the UK and it is the USA. Remember Boris Johnson, who probably took Ukraine as every third word in what he was trying to say. So we need to understand this very carefully. The Russians actually blame the SAS for the attacks that happened on the Crimea Bridge, and the Americans and the SAS, along with the Polish, for the attacks that happened on the Nord Stream. Ukrainian military chief today, as a matter of fact, in the evening, urges Zelensky. Now his name is Zelensky, and his the president is of course Zelensky. There's something to do with the Z. Interestingly, they wanted to ban the letter Z in their country when the Russians started using this on their vehicles. Anyways, I digress. It says that he wanted the president to sign a law increasing the consequences of desertion. Now, why would an army chief ask his president to do something like that? It's something that we need to analyze. Are there more desertions within the Ukrainians? Reports are certain right wing organizations, we all know who they are, I don't want to name them because of the platform that I am on, uh, have been actually getting into certain actions against their own troops, wherein they're pushing them into offensive, pushing them into the front line. And as a matter of fact, in the last episode, I also covered a factor where about 20 or 30 Polish soldiers were killed by these same nationalist forces who were trying to tell them to go on an offensive, and the Polish did not want to because of adverse circumstances. This tells you something, that either the desertion rates in Ukraine are so high that they actually have to implement a stricter consequence for it, or they're not able to find people, and whoever they get, they can rope them in and tie the knot and be done with it. Something that we'll have to see in the future. Of course, Zelensky gave an interview some time ago where he, of course, demanded a whole list of things that any Ukrainian does. He also mentioned that he has about 250,000 troops ready for battle, and another no, 200, troops ready for battle, and another about 200,000 troops that could be called. Now, from an army that was about 260 to 300,000 troops strong at the beginning of this war, and a reserve of another 4 or 500,000 soldiers, has come down to a total of about 450,000. Where did the rest go is something that the Ukrainians need to answer. Some people have actually termed their casualties as of date today at about 145,000 killed in action, and another 200,000 who are wounded grievously or non grievously is something that was not mentioned in this report. Germany and 7 other EU countries speak out against the Russian gas price cap. Now, I told you this last time, oil cap, gas price cap is not working out. But because of the collective West and the globalist agendas and the so-called neocons that are running the entire show, they don't want this stuff. This is more of a media war than actually action. They know that the Russian gas and oil will be bought. They know how it is being bought. They know India is sending the oil, China is sending the gas. But on the optic level, they want to keep the pressure up. Europe must ignore any calls for ceasefire. And this is from our friend Rishi Sunak, who's the newly, brought in. Now, I'm not new anymore, but anyways, considering British standards, if I may, uh, who's been brought in, and he says Europe must ignore any calls for ceasefire from Russia until it withdraws its troops from the military operation zone. West should also continue focus on reducing Russia's military power, and any calls for negotiations could allow the Russian forces to regroup and replenish. I think Mr. Sunak needs to get a little more out of his British intelligence because they're not telling him the whole story. Anyways, let's just leave it at that. This is an interesting news, and it's just for fun. I've put it across. So the Ukrainians had sent the Polish police chief a gift. There was about, I think, 2 grenade launchers that they had sent, and I've put it across here. So he kept it in his office and this and that. And he said, one fine day he decided to move it a little bit, and one of them exploded. Kiev sent him grenade launchers as a gift. So you can imagine what kind of a mental state these guys are. That's the police chief in Poland, and that's what happened to his office when these two things exploded. So you can imagine the power. Thank God he's safe. He's had some minor injuries and he's okay. He's talking about the British troops. He says British general admits to UK deployed troops in Ukraine, and this general's name is General Robert Magowan. Mag Magwan or whatever. I am sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. But anyways, this is what he says. He says members of the 45 Commando Group of the Royal Marines left Ukraine in January after evacuating the British embassies. However, some 300 members of this elite unit was sent back into the country in the month of April. 300. What are they doing? Is something that the Brits will need to answer to their own taxpayers, who are, by the way, going cold as we speak. There's another news that the BBC reported, which I found very interesting. Absent UK soldiers may have traveled to Ukraine. This happened a while ago, but you can imagine people are just leaving the British army and going off and fighting in Ukraine. What is the desperation to fight is something that I don't understand. But of course, I do know that these mercenaries make a lot of money. So tells you the loyalty of the British army, who's supposed to be a front line for the NATO. Battle of Bakhmut. I think this one word, Bakhmut, this city has been termed across. There was a bit of a discussion on the WhatsApp group as well, where people are talking about, yeah, Bakhmut. Why is it so important? Let's just find out what's happening in Bakhmut right now. Uh, the From the Russian side, there's a mercenary group that, as it's called, or the private military organization, as the Russians call it. It's founded by this person called Yevgeny Prigozhin. He is basically a very, very close ally of Vladimir Putin. And these guys, these soldiers, are basically guys who've retired from the Russian army or are on contract from the Russian army to go into these places and stuff like that. Also, these guys, just like any other private military force, just like the Foreign Legion in France, also goes to prisons and stuff like that to pick up their people, to give them a chance to straighten up their lives. Anyways, this battle is being fought like a private little war by the Wagner group in Bakhmut. Of course, the Americans also came up with a group of private military forces that were operating in Ukraine under a retired American brigadier, and they were known as Mozart. It seems they got their what's beaten up, and they've kind of withdrawn from the Battle of Bakhmut. Now, for the uninitiated, Bakhmut is located in a very strategic supply route. I'll show you in the maps so you'll be able to understand. I've just got a couple of screenshots so you can see it. Experts agree that the capture of Bakhmut, and experts, when I say, is from both sides. There are a few level headed voices coming out of Ukraine as well. It's not all doom in that place. They're hard to find, but I did find them, and I latch on to them and stay that way so that I get to know what's happening and what are they talking about. So, Battle of Bakhmut could potentially change the course of the conflict and give Russia a platform to launch a broader campaign across many parts of Ukraine. If you were to believe the Russian media today or the Russian telegram channels, the Battle of Bakhmut should be coming to an end very soon. So this is the big map. This, if you see where the concentration of these blue dots is, there is the city of Bakhmut. If you look at these little yellow lines coming from the side and from the top and from the bottom, these are roads and rail lines. This place seems to be a junction, a cross point where a lot of things are crossing by from the mainland of Ukraine and the currently, or the Donetsk People's Republic. Now that's something that is interesting, because this is like, it's been termed by the Ukrainians itself as a linchpin of their defenses. So that's something that we need to understand. Let's move forward. This is a map with not all those stuff which is marked. Those are the forces and stuff like that. So this does not have all that marked. Now the Ukrainians had drawn a battle line, right? During the 8 years, as I said, they had to build up. They created a battle line in this area because they knew the attack, whenever it does from the Russians, are going to come right here. The battle line started from the north. If you see where the red line, there is an artificial red line that I've drawn, which comes down like that. In the north, there's a city called Crimea. Now, Crimea is a place that is currently under Russian occupation. They had taken it somewhere, I think, in July or August. There's another city that, if you come down, there's a small gap. There's a city in the middle, about an halfway down to that place. Is called Solidar, where a lot of the fighting is taking place. Solidar is a city just above Bakhmut, if I may just go back, where the top, that golden cross is there. That's where Solidar is. Uh, Below Solidar, you've got the city of Bakhmut. Below Bakhmut, you go, there's a city of Torres. I'm sorry, I might be messing up the pronunciation. I try and remember the city, but every time I forget it. But anyways, post that, if you see, there is Donetsk. This is the main city of Donetsk, which is the capital of the Donetsk People's Republic. This particular city has been coming under shelling quite a bit from the Ukrainian forces, and this is being reported by both the Western and the Russian media. There were two cities, there were two little townships, or suburbs, or some in that. I've not been there, so I can't really describe it. But two little townships in the in two different directions from Donetsk. One is on the north part. It's called Avdiivka. I'm sure all of you can see the A. And if you go south in the same line, there's another town called Maryanka. Now, Maryanka came under Russian control about 2 days ago. They're trying to kind of clear the place. Avdiivka, the battle has begun as we speak, if you believe what the Russians are having to say. And where the let me just take off the banner so that you guys can see where this entire line ends at the bottom is a little town called Vugledar. Vugledar is a place where again the battles between the Russians and the Ukrainians are happening pretty hardcore. This is the place where the maximum concentration is taking place at this moment. This is where the actual hot war is being fought. Where you can see the blue shaded area is the place of the Donetsk People's Republic that the Russians need to conquer to make that People's Republic, which is a part of Russia, complete. There are two little towns which are beyond this red line on towards the left. If you see SLO and KRMA, so that's Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. These are twin towns, as per se. It's called a conurbation. These are the main supply lines today for the Battle of Bakhmut, for the Battle of Avdiivka, and for whatever action is taking place in Donetsk. And these towns also supply to the north to the Ukrainian groups right there. Now, if you look at this particular map, I just put it across, you could see the Ukrainian troop concentrations, which are marked in blue. Of course, this is a Russian map, so it's not showing you the large concentration of Russian troops from the mobilized forces as we could see in the south and towards Belarus. But you see three major concentrations of the Ukrainian armed forces. One is towards this Kherson region in the south and towards the Zaporozhye region, where the blue marks are there. The second is, of course, in this Donbass, where we just discussed. Some stuff in Kharkiv, which is very close to the Russian border, and some stuff in the north towards Kiev. These are the places, this is telling you where the Russian deployments are also taking place opposite to these forces. The 300,000 reservists, and today the number, according to certain experts who know their business, is gone up to about 540,000 Russian troops. My eye on Putin tells me that he met the Security Council a couple of days ago. He's meeting the military commanders in the next, as we speak, in Belarus and in Russia as well. And he's meeting all the regional military commanders to do whatever he needs to. Of course, I don't know what exactly are they discussing, but just the sheer three meetings back to back seems pretty interesting. He's also in Belarus. It's concerning. Now, Belarus can be an interesting thing. If you see in the north, where these blue lines next to Kiev are there, Belarus is right up the north, and the Russians are supposed to have about 240,000 odd troops which have been collected in that area. Now, when I say 240,000, this probably includes the Belarusian army, which is about 75 or 70 or 75,000 troops. Even if you remove that, that's about 150,000 troops from the Russians in terms of their aircraft, their tanks, and this and that. The Russians claim this is basically a training exercise that is being done with the Belarusians, and Putin also said that this is a formation of a unified defense space. Heavy missile strikes continue on Ukraine, and I want to ask, when I go through all these things, I want to ask you, what do you believe? I'm not going to tell you what to believe, but I want to ask you, what do you believe? The first news article, and these are all three Russian news articles, the Time, the Reuters and stuff like that. Russia Ukraine live updates. Ukraine shoots down 30 Russian drones, officials say. They're all yesterday and today. Russia Ukraine war live updates. Kiev region says Russian drone attack caused fairly serious damage. Right? So shoots down 30 drones, and after that they also get fairly serious damage. The Russia-Ukraine war live update, it says fog-shrouded Kiev recovers after Russian strikes, power restored to 6 million people. Now, this is very interesting when you look at it. And one part, and the Ukrainians have been called out multiple times, because they say, Russians fired 70 rockets, we shot down 16, but there were 14 damage at the bottom. They've been caught out too many times on this. Again, they say 30 Russian drones have been this thing, and they say only 2 explosions were heard on Monday in the capital. If only 2 explosions were heard, were the 2 explosions fairly serious? I don't know what to believe anymore, which comes out of Kiev. What the Russians are doing is also very interesting, is that they attack a particular power station or water station and stuff like that. They wait for a week, they let the Ukrainians build it back and go once again. So that's exactly what has been happening in Kiev. in the past couple of days. As a matter of fact, they had one of their satellites. I'm sorry, I forgot to put that. It just struck my mind. Take a photograph of Kiev right after the strikes. It was completely dark. Compare the statements. Now, this is just some challenges. I want to run through these news articles so that we come to the gist of the discussion at the end. Ukraine war, Russia could launch more heavy strikes, Zelensky warns, and this is just 2 days ago. Ukrainian National Security Advisor, about 4 days ago, says Russia has enough missiles for only 3-4 or more strikes. But if you read this article, he says even further, he says, they will keep some for a potential war with NATO. So he's not going to have many more strikes coming into Ukraine. He said that 3 days later, boom, whole lot of things happened onto Ukraine again. That is the National Security and Defense Council Secretary, and you've got the President himself, President Zelensky. Air defense. Now, of course, with the drone strikes, with the missile strikes, air defense has become a big part of the discussion as far as the Ukraine war is concerned. The Ukrainians have been asking for it, and the US now says we will send a missile battery of the Patriots. A missile battery, last time I checked, will have about 120 missiles loaded in. And these missiles aren't cheap, they are very expensive, and they are very technical. Put that across to the point where they will be sending advisors into Ukraine, and you get the picture of what I'm talking about. So they're gonna send some new technical weapons, and they will need to send people to actually use those weapons because the Ukrainians cannot be trained in them in time. Now, Patriots was a news that came out a couple of days ago. Forbes today reported that Ukraine may finally get Greece's Russian S-300 missiles. Now, Greece, of course, had old Russian S-300s with them. Now, Greece, the next report says Greece offers its S-300 defense missile system to Kiev in exchange of US Patriot systems. What are they saying? Ki by Patriot, you please give me, I'll give him the S-300 which he knows how to use. Remember one thing, each country is going to make a buck and a half. It's not just Pakistan. I'm sure Poland is also doing the same damn thing. I'll tell you why. It's the last slide in this presentation, written in the American Conservative as a concern of what the Americans are doing in Ukraine. We'll get to that. Things to know, no prospect of a serious peace talk, says UN General Secretary Guterres. Leaders of a joint expeditionary forces to discuss the Russia-Ukraine war. Remember some time ago I told you guys about a coalition of the willing. There's a new name, Joint Expeditionary Force. If you read the second paragraph, it says operating 2018, the JEF coalition complements the NATO. Why, if you have a military alliance, why do you want to go into another one? That's because the current military alliance, a lot of people don't want to fight. And that's something we must understand. And that's the reason why I put this across here. So they're going to have a meeting very, I think it was supposed to be today, Monday. So yeah, it might be happening as we speak in Riga, in the capital of Latvia, where President Volodymyr Zelensky is supposed to be addressing the forum. I think he's like a fixture, FIFA he wanted to address, this he wanted to address. Everywhere usko speech likh ke de dete hain, chal bhai shuru ho ja, bolna shuru ho ja. That's, I mean, we need to read these things. The Wall Street Journal today reported Russia's economic war hits European factories. Happy realization, Wall Street Journal. Europe's economy today reported EU entity. It's an analysis, and it's interesting that these analyses have started coming in the EU. Mind you, before I read into this, in the UK, there are no analysis. There's one odd article that comes in The Guardian or something like that, but it's all completely twisted within the narrative. US has a certain opposition. UK has not been able to develop any opposition towards their efforts within Ukraine. So that tells you the entire ecosystem and what they're thinking. There has to be an opposition. You cannot have a one-sided affair. It cannot be so. You're spending your own money, at least figure out what is happening with it. EU unity over Russia sanction falters as Europe's economy wilts. I told you this with regards to the oil price gap and the Russian gas price cap as well. Away from the spotlight, a debate rages within the European Union over the post-war Ukraine. They're saying, यार अब इतना झगड़ा तो करा लिया, वो तो टूट जाएगा, बनाएगा कौन उसको? ये हमारे सामने खड़ा होगा. अभी तो Zelensky is asking for everything. यार, give me 2 toothbrushes, give me 3 toothpaste and stuff like that. Post the war finishes, he's going to do the exact same thing, considering his regime is still there. That's what they're considering. But, anyways, uh, this is an interesting debate because they might realize if this war doesn't stop and Ukraine and the Russians attack and Ukraine gets down to dust, it's Europe who's going to have to pay for it. It's Europe who's going to have to take care of the 44 million people in Ukraine. Oil price cap. Now, Bloomberg reported that Putin's war budget would not take a hit from the oil price gap. Interesting. Wasn't that a sanction? The Forbes reported Washington's oil price cap won't work and Putin knows it. Then why do it? That's the question I ask. It's morality. Haven't we heard this against India? Be on the right side of history. It's not moral to be buying oil from Russia. You're morally incorrect with your relations with Russia. We've heard a lot of these lectures being given to us in India. I'll talk about the morality a little later. This is funny, right? Okay, this is really funny. The Mirror, I mean, it breaks me into laughter every time I read this newspaper because the Mirror is the only one that is still sticking with the story of Russian president having cancer, right? The rest of the guys reported it and I think they said, yaar, ho gaya, theek hai, it didn't work. This guy is still on it. He says, vultures circling Vladimir Putin as eyes plot coup and minister depressed. What is their source? Some sources in the British intelligence. Interesting. So that's something that we need to know. Here's the same British intelligence who told us that Kiev will fall in 3 days. And today they're telling Kiev, fight on. Bhaiya, maaf karo. The question is, why is the UK so heavily invested in this war? As I said, there is literally no opposition. Nobody talks about the factor that this war is dragging the UK economy down into the dump. Why aren't they talking about it? What is happening in this war that is so important to the United Kingdom? Is it trying to re-establish itself post the divorce from the EU as a great power in Europe, or what is it? I'm not very sure. But it seems a little weird that the UK is so heavily invested in it. Now, this is something interesting. The Ukrainians tie collaborators to Poles in Kherson post the Russian withdrawal. They turned some people as collaborators and they tied people to a pole. I mean, these are the same civilians that they were fighting and dying for. Ukrainian civilians stripped and tied up and beaten by vigilantes in shocking videos. And this, my friends, has come out. Let me just remove the banner so that you come to know where this has come out. It has come out in the AU News, which is Australia. So the West knows what is happening. It's not that they're unaware, but why isn't anybody talking about this? Is interesting. Let's move forward. Apologize for that. Now, responsible statecraft, as I was telling you, and my beginning, I want to put something across to you that it is all money. Responsible Statecraft, a very interesting website and a very interesting, forum, has written an article which says, "Beware arms marketers in exploiting Ukraine war to avoid to exploiting Ukraine war to profit and avoid oversight." I'll tell you how the oversight happens. It's terrible when I actually read this to realize this actually takes place in America. Congressional emergency powers are allowing the potential price gouging and increased production well beyond the need. Okay. In some cases, for example, contractors doing Ukraine related work are not required to provide the Pentagon with certified cost and pricing data information. The Pentagon needs to avoid getting ripped off by the military contractors. The department needs this data to make sure company fairly prices the goods and services for a job before it awards that company a contract. The Pentagon's Office of the Inspector General has made this clear, calling cost data most reliable source of information from contracting officers. I want to get into the next one, which talks about, given the defense industry's history of overcharging the Pentagon, sometimes to the tune of, take a breath, 3,000%. Lawmakers should be only strengthening the requirements from contractors to provide certified cost and pricing information. Boeing has Boeing already appears to be pushing an envelope on certified cost and pricing data with the proposal to develop a new long range precision strike weapon for Ukraine. The Pentagon is now considering the company's plan to produce ground launched small diameter bombs, which includes a waiver to exempt the company from providing cost and pricing information before winning the contract award. Is this a preparation for Joe Biden's re election? Is something that we'll need to see in the future, because we know the American politics, or Joe Biden, or I think even the American political system, as a matter of fact, the military industrial complex controls a lot within the American system. You can see what's happening and how the money will be channeled across the entire thing. It'll come to political parties as donations, aid, or I don't know, gifts, or whatever it is, whatever the American laws actually understand. This to me is the most interesting thing which has come out of America, December 19th, 2022. How does India always feature into this? Morally inappropriate for India to buy Russian oil. Yeah, this is what the Ukrainian foreign minister said to our friend NDTV. PM Modi's comments on Russia Ukraine war could well have averted a global nuclear disaster, says the CIA chief. Now, who do we believe? The Ukrainian foreign minister or the CIA chief? I'd leave that to you. But I want to ask the Ukrainian foreign minister, what business is this war of to India? Nothing. And that has been elucidated very clearly by Dr. Jaishankar. And I don't want to get into the entire thing. But the morality factor, and I want to ask you guys a simple question. Is this whole talk of morality the new form of mental colonialism? If you guys feel yes, please do respond in the comments. I really want to know. This is something that I came up with, that this moral factor that they keep throwing on us, is this a new way to influence countries' behavior by telling them, no, this is not the right way of doing things, this is not the moral way of doing things, this is not the Western civilized way of doing things? Again, back to the same thing. Please tell me, is this whole morality discussion a part of the Western new colonialist plans? Right, thoughts, which is coming to the end. This is the last slide of my presentation. Russian objectives and Western objectives. What were the Russian objectives? Denazification, demilitarization, and of course, recognition of the two breakaway republics at that time. Today, now they're going to be four with Kherson and Zaporozhye added to it. That's what they're saying, and that's what they want, and they've not changed that. The Western objectives are something very interesting that they have said: regime change, balkanization of Russia, and weakening of Russia if it survives. Now, this is interesting because this was actually spelled out by the American Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, former General Lloyd Austin. This to me is very, very important because this ties in with my third point, which talks about negotiations. When you're talking about a country like this, please understand, you look at what happened with the Chinese on look at what happened with Bilawal Bhutto. Let me just take that as a simple thing. What happened with Bilawal? He made a certain comment about our prime minister. We all got enraged. We said, "Yeah, how dare he? He has no business." Right? It was the whole matter of fact of it that he actually wanted to say something like that to the prime minister. You may like him or not, political considerations apart, he actually said that to a sitting leader of our country. Now you can imagine what all has been said about President Putin. Do you think the Russians are not keeping a track of what is happening? Do you think the Russians are stupid that they don't know what is happening around here? Yeah, the Western media can go into Russia and interview the 10, 20, 30 people out of 100 that do have a difference with Putin. I'm sure they're there. That's why he wins his elections at about 65, 70% and not 99% as a dictator should. So there is an opposition. But actually calling somebody out names is going to become a grave challenge for the Western powers to negotiate. After that, I'm going to just stick with my third point. Merkel said what she said, and President Putin called her out and said, now where is the trust? Who am I to believe? And that's going to be a big factor within the negotiations going forward. The Ukraine army chief, again, as I said, has given an interview to The Economist. Uh, his demands are, crazy: 300 tanks, some 300 artillery systems, some 1,000 rockets of this type, one this, one that, some 3.5 million rounds of some ammunition, and this. He is not asking for a certain amount of equipment. He's asking for a whole army. And that is not me saying. I spoke to certain people from the army, and they said, boss, this is a lot of equipment. I don't think NATO would have that much within Europe today to give it. They might have one odd thing out of his list, but it's not going to be there completely. Now, with Putin actually doing these little meetings around the place, the first thought that comes to you, yeah, he's meeting his military commanders. He's gone to Belarus to meet Lukashenko. His troops are there, military commanders. Is something big happening? A lot of the Russians seem to say so. I can't put my money on it. But one thing that does tell you something may happen is the factor that the ground has started to harden up. And if the Russians are wanting to do something, the time would be now. Because at the end of it, you must understand, beyond this point of time, if the Russians actually act, they would be in the same situation as last year, where they would actually need to get into January and February, when the ice or the snow starts melting. And again, is the same factor of the Rasputitsa, which happens in that part of the world, where everything turns to mulch. Is the timing right? He's losing time, if I may. And this is some certain military experts who said, if the Russians go out all out in an offensive, they would need about 12 to 15 weeks to finish their offensive to a certain, you know, objective, out and out, and make sure everything is secure. Now, if you look at it right now, time is coming close. I am no military expert. I'm just telling you what I've read certain places. If you ask me, if the Russians are wanting to do a lightning fast offensive, maybe there is time. I'm not sure. I don't know how their offensive doctrine has been planned. What are the prongs that are coming out? Let's wait and watch. Some people, of course, as General Shaukin Chauhan mentioned, that if there is an offensive, it may happen at spring, somewhere in April and May. That may so be the case as well. By that time, the Russians kind of streamline everything, ensure that the West is gone down the dump, and then they do whatever they need to do in terms of their aims in Ukraine. Right? Why is Putin making himself seen while all this planning is happening? Remember one thing: when the withdrawal took place from Kherson, Putin was not in front. When a lot of other things took place in Russia, Putin was never in the front. He kept himself away from these little disasters that took place within the Russian this thing. Yes, he came out and talked about the pipeline explosion. He talked about the Crimea bridge. Uh, but why is he making himself seen so much that I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this? If Putin called all these chaps to the office, nobody would have come to know even. Now, is he making himself seen while the planning is taking place? If he is, that tells you that the planning is going to be pretty solid, and they are probably going to be very close to achieving whatever they set out to be in their current war plan. Because the objectives that I spoke to you were the first objectives as listed out by the Russian president. What they are today, the Russians have not spoken about. What can and will the West do if the Russians actually get into an offensive? Not much. They've got this coalition of willing, some 40, 60,000 troops or 100,000 troops. They can stand in the western part of Ukraine and hope as hell that the Russians don't fire a rocket on them. And if they do, of course, the Americans will fire back, and we know what's going to happen. Militarily, there is little that the Americans or the West can do. That is because the Western powers to actually ensure the Ukrainians could be supplied with arms and ammunition is reducing day by day. So it's going to be a challenge for the West to counter a large offensive if it does come out from the Russian side. The Ukrainian future, and General Shaukin Chauhan actually spoke of this very, very nicely. He said the only people that are going to lose in this war are going to be the Ukrainians. And I believe that very, very carefully. Today, who's freezing? You can say, those salutes and the badges and all that you want, but your wife and daughter and your mother and your family are going to be freezing at home every time the Russians plan to fire a huge missile strike on your country. So that is the reality of the situation. Ukrainians have lost a lot of soldiers, a lot of soldiers. That's because of the kind of actions that they've been taking. I think Ukrainians, for that once, have kept one simple thing in their mind: is the best defense is an offensive. So they've been on like the offensive run all the time, and they're now talking about an offensive which they want to take from Zaporozhye down to Melitopol, and which will come down into the Sea of Azov, cutting the Russian land route into Ukraine, which is what the Russians wanted to do unofficially. Zelensky's future is interesting because there is sudden amount of interest attention that is coming to the army chief. Now that to me is very interesting because the army chief is the only guy that has actually spoken to the Russians after the war has begun. He's spoken to his counterpart General Shoigu in Russia about certain things, and if you know that prisoner exchanges have been taking place between both the armies, so there is seems to be a back door which has been open for a while between both the forces, but the entire rhetoric of whose crowned king is President Zelensky has not let all this stuff come out. And of course, the control of news within the West is going to be very, very strong. Will America stay the course? Now, that's very, very important for us to understand. There are a lot of voices in the Republicans and the Congress which are today talking about stop. There are voices that are talking, as I read the article in the American Conservative, there are voices talking about reducing the amount of aid and asking for an accountability from the Ukrainians. my, my apologies for not muting that out. They're asking for an accountability from the Ukrainians in the middle of a war, and that too from Ukraine. So it's going to be interesting to see how long will the Americans actually carry this forward. But one thing is for sure: if the Americans slip, there's the Britishers who are going to say, "Hey, bhai, chal, chal, chal." And if the Britishers slip, there's going to be the Americans pushing them forward and making sure this thing keeps rolling across. Because at the end of it, with the kind of political capital that has been invested into this war, it will be very, very difficult for the political leadership for both these countries to just back off. Okay. Having said that, the British Prime Minister, although he said that we should not slack off and this and that, has also asked for a certain audit of what has gone into Ukraine. So that's something that we need to understand. Now, the China factor. Now, the China factor is very interesting because to me, the Chinese are a happy bystander. They're making money from the Europeans selling gas. The Americans are diverted. They are not talking about the Chinese as much as they would if this war is not there. Uh, Russia is giving them good cheap gas, good cheap oil, and good cheap materials for whatever they want. Of course, their industry is in a bit of a tailspin right now, but yeah, Chinese love to stock. So that's happening. And if I was the Chinese, I would keep this war going for as long as possible so that I can do whatever I need to without the Americans and the West coming in the middle of my way. They also tried this with regards to, with India as well, and you can understand what is happening here. So please look at it very, very carefully. That there is something that we need to understand, that China today will take an complete, complete advantage of the situation, of the Western ignorance of the situation within Ukraine. And that, my friends, is the bottom line that we need to understand. If the West actually set the pivot to Asia, I don't think they're living up to their promise. And for a while now, till the time this war does not come to a certain conclusion, it's going to be a challenge. Of course, the Taiwanese had also said that the Americans are not giving us arms and this and that and the other. So there are issues. Now, guys, before I actually start up with your questions, I want to just tell you guys that this, of course, is a longish video where I kind of tried to cover a lot of things because I hadn't done an update last week. I did this interview with General Shokin, and I didn't want to overdo the Ukraine war because last week there was not much that was taking place. So shoot your comments. Let's see what you guys have to say with regards to what I said and any of your thoughts that you want to put across with regards to the Ukraine war. The challenge with the Ukraine war today is going to be how will it come to a certain conclusion, because if it comes to a complete destruction of Ukraine, you and I know there's going to be challenges with regards to refugees, economics, and a whole lot of other things. If it comes to a negotiated peace without both the parties kind of feeling sorted in a certain way, this war will come back again. Look at the First World War and the continuation of it, the so called Second World War. I call it a break between both the wars for whatever 10, 15 years before the second one started again. Because the first one was brought to a point where one party was squeezed up, thrown in the corner, and the war did not come to a certain conclusion. That's what happens with war. So yes, it is a sad thing that we are in this situation where people are dying every day in Ukraine. Some of them are innocent bystanders, but that's what we have in front of us. Blame whoever you decide to, because I've given you a lot of the facts over the past 8-10 months. I'm sure you guys have your own opinions. Guys, please like this video, subscribe. If you're joining in right now, if you're watching from before, please check your subscriptions, hit the bell icon so that you get notifications. Of course, yes, if you can, please do help out the Dev Talks efforts. It gives me a lot of help with regards trying to make sure that I can do better and better for you with regards the content and with regards the setup and stuff like that. I'm trying some new stuff. Let me know how it works in the next couple of days. Right, let's get into the first question. Yeah, the start of winter offensive of Russia, the hammer of the Russia's god of war. Mr. Value Pilgrim, you seem to be very sure of what is going to happen. I don't know, because the Russians could actually have very, very slight inch forward offensives because of the weather, because of the factor that they might not want to hit hard. Because remember, these big arrow offensives also have big arrow casualties. So that's something we need to keep in mind. I don't know what the Russian generals are thinking. If they're able to, they would try and do a certain amount of offensives. It would be not big arrow, but small arrow, but the medium arrow, na aapka na mera, where certain objectives would be met. What those objectives are at the moment very difficult for me to enunciate. A lot of people talk about Odessa, a lot of people talk about Kharkiv, a lot of people talk about uh, Transnistria, which is in the north east of Moldova. There are loads of things which are there in the paradigm. So let's move forward. Afghanistan yesterday, Ukraine today. Who will it be tomorrow? Iron Man's script was a bit too honest. Absolutely, I agree with you, because where is it going to be today? Taiwan could be the next. I don't know, but this is the reality of life. We need to kind of live with it, because the history, and especially in our context as well, has been twisted so badly all over the place. When you look at the Ukraine history, everybody talks about, oh, Ukraine was a peace-loving democratic country, right? Before 24th of February. 24th of February, Russians attacked and destroyed the country. Nobody talks about what was happening before. Nobody talks about the emergence of the huge right-wing movement in Ukraine. What caused the Maidan protests? What caused a whole lot of other problems within Ukraine? It is the most corrupt country in the world, probably as close as to Pakistan. But that's the reality. Ukraine will not lose and Russia will not win. That's indeed possible. Let me assure you this, both of them, if I may say this very categorically, I don't think Russia will even win, because a loss of life, a loss of business, and a whole lot of other losses that the Russians are going to go through because of this war. So, yeah, they might win the military battle, but in their country, people loss is still a loss. Having said that, what the Russian objective to me looks like is to kind of change this financial global order, which is where they're trying to have their own currencies being moved out. They've encouraged the Chinese to go and do something with the Saudis. India is doing a lot with regards to the rupee, the dollar dominance, and the economic war of attrition that the Russians and the Europeans, or the Russians and the Western powers, are fighting. The Russians might just end up winning that. Had Merkel told Ukraine to follow Minsk, there'd be no war and Germany would be fine. Why didn't she realize this is not clear to me. So I don't think she did not realize it, because when you look at her statements today, she says it was just to buy time. Uh, Merkel, as a lot of people have touted it out to be, is because she had good relations with Vladimir Putin. She could speak Russian, he could speak German, so there was some sort of a rapport between both these people. Having said that, if you look at Merkel's history within Germany and what she's done to Europe, people remember her in a very, very nasty way. So the whole migration crisis, I don't know, it was 2016 or something like that, where Germany basically realized, had some terrible incidents happening in the new year in Berlin. So that all has been blamed onto the so-called Mother Merkel. As far as the Minsk is concerned, I think the Russians were taken for a ride. Let me just say that Putin let himself go for a ride with the Americans in the yearn for being a part of the Western society, and look what it's brought him there. Every country in geopolitics or in international relations, no matter how good friends you are, you can't trust anyone. You need your interest, that country needs theirs. Make sure they both merge, they will do what it is required to be done. If the interests are opposite, they might say whatever, they will not do it. UK is always the royal lapdog of Uncle Sam. No denials in that fact, sir. Russia will not win, Ukraine will not use, Ukraine will be supported militarily, financially till the time all the EU members get together and reach a consensus to include Ukraine in EU. So even if that happens, there's no this thing. Unless and until the Ukraine actually lands up into NATO. And by the way, one of the objectives was to keep Ukraine away from NATO. Today, what is fighting in Ukraine is a completely NATO army. So I'd like to actually ask the Russians, have they actually achieved keeping Ukraine out of NATO as an objective, or something that we'll have to think about? Even if the Ukrainian and the Russian leadership is ready for a ceasefire, will NATO allow it, as they are supplying the arms to the Ukrainian? Well, in March, the Ukrainians were about to actually sit down with the Russians and negotiate. Boris Johnson flew in and said, listen, if you do that, we won't support you. And the Ukrainians had to back off. Uh, as I said, the Western objective is to weaken Russia, and this has been elucidated by a lot of people. Of course, there are a whole lot of objectives where President Biden had come to Poland sometime in April or something like that, where he had said this man cannot be in power for much longer. So the regime change seems to be another objective. I don't know if they're keeping it alive still now or have they given it up. So when you see stuff like that, I don't know how much of an interest is there for the Western powers to actually have this war come to a conclusion. The military industrial complex, a lot of money, that's how it is. Neocons aren't running this one. It's their Democrat equivalent known as neolibs. Sir, change of terminology. I agree with you, but honestly, change of terminology. As long as the neo is there, they're all the same. Jokes apart, but yeah, I agree with you. Uh, One of the Western experts said the Russian wars are like this. They fight very poorly in the first year, so then they throw 1 million men in battle and scale the battle drastically. You have a second message, Amay, and which reads changes, and after that they just pound everything and flatten everything. Amay, I'd like you to, after the show, please Google Battle of Bakhmut pictures. It'll remind you of the battles of the First World War. They are terrible. There is nothing left. The kind of battles that are taking place, and a Russian point of view is very, say that we've got the entire Bakhmut area within our fire control. There is a reason they're not kind of encircling the Ukrainian troops. That's what they say. I don't know, it sounds plausible, but I don't know if it's exactly happening. They say that we want Ukraine to keep on throwing troops into this area because we know where they're coming from, we know their roads, and we're able to actually destroy them. And the Ukrainian battlefield casualties within that place are crossing almost 1,000 men a day. So that's something that we need to understand. I don't know if the Russians are doing this purposefully. I don't know what is their battle plan, but we know one thing: they're not using as much as infantry to do the face-to-face fighting. They identify, they pound it with heavy artillery, and then try and move forward a little bit just to clear out the areas. Greece has S-300 system. Wow, no wonder Erdogan also wanted S-400. Exactly. The Greece has S-300 and they want to fix the Patriots in the island of Crete, which is facing Erdogan. To see, each country has its own interests, and that's what I said. Each one of these guys want a pound of flesh coming out of Ukraine. I spoke about what land these countries want. Poland wants one part of Ukraine. And they've got these dreams. Hungary wants a certain part. Romania, of course, wants the entire of Moldova. It was, I forget the name of that entire region which was separated out after the Second World War. Anyways, it'll come to me. I'll tell you guys. If you guys know, please just put it in the comments so that I can take it up. This area was known as something. It's gonna ring through the night for me. Anyways, let me get back. My takeaways from this: Europe and the world is finally getting out of this relationship with the USA. Zelensky is becoming a liability for the West, and Russia looks like it's winning on multiple fronts. Well, agreed on the first one. There is not much, but let me tell you, it's going to be damn difficult for the European leaders, especially the current lot, to come out of this relationship with the USA. They are politically invested in their relation with the USA. So that's going to be a challenge unless and until we see what happened in Italy, what happened in Sweden, and what happens very often in England after Boris Johnson came in, as far as the government's changing and concerned. Russians willing? Well, I'm no Antaryami. Looks like it certainly at the moment. They can, to my mind, and let me just say this very clearly. You may agree with me or not. The Russians can actually declare a victory as we speak. They can just say, okay, bye, we'll take the rest of Donbass, and that's it. We are sitting quiet after that. Do what you need to. And then hit hard at any bloody movement that happens from the Ukrainians and make sure that they are pounded out of the dust. They could do that, but the factor will be that the Ukrainians will keep on building up and keep on coming, because the NATO forces are not going to keep quiet. They will keep sending these weapons. They will keep propping up NATO, so there'll be suicide attacks and there'll be a whole lot of nonsense that the Ukrainians would be doing over here. You've got another question, which I will take it up. Continued fronts. India has come out of its reputation enhanced, and we need to resist the USA charm offensive. China has managed to lose out with both the West and the Russians. West, yes, to a certain extent, but China is enjoying the way that the West has left it alone. Because if the Chinese would step in formally, there's going to be sidetrack sanctions that would be coming towards the Chinese. The Russians, remember, are a resource rich country. They've got a lot of natural resources, and anybody who wants oil, Russia is a big guy. Chinese don't have that much. They've got these consumer goods and stuff like that, chips and this and that and the other, which the world will kind of can to a certain extent live without. You can't live without fuel. Your entire system will collapse. So yeah, there's a bit of a problem there. But the Chinese, to my mind, are going to use this opportunity as much as they can. Parts of EU are selling wood to burn in supermarkets to keep warm. So they've been doing that since October. This usually happens in developing nations or rural areas. Yeah, development to me, have I've now realized, and agree with me or not, but development to me is also a development of the foreign policy and thought process. Is not better roads and infrastructure. If you have great roads, infrastructure, and leaders like Europe, that all will turn to dust really fast. Right. The white man's burden. Yes, I know what you're talking about. Morality is just psyops, but this war is less about war and more about politics. Absolutely. It's more about narratives. It's more about social media, TikTok. The Ukrainian army is known as a TikTok army. So, yeah, you're absolutely correct. The West fights a PR war. Russian fights a real one. You know, there's a there's a there's a bit of a saying that the Americans know how to produce weapons, the Chinese know how to make factories, the Indians know how to do their IT, the Britishers know how to do this, and the French know how to do this. The Russians know how to fight. So that's something. This is a age old, not age old, but somewhere around the end of the Cold War sort of a thing. This is what's being spoken about. So if the West actually believes that, they need to sit down with the Russians and talk. The threat of usage of nuclear weapons has still not gone. I don't think so. Satyam, uh, let's understand one thing. Yes, the rhetoric about the nuclear weapons usage has gone up multifold in this war. There's no question about it. I don't think people are insane enough to actually use this in either side. And no matter as much as we dislike the Western setup and the Western leaders, I don't think they've gone that insane that they would actually press the button on a nuclear switch. That's not going to happen, because at the end of it, please understand, there's something known as massive retaliation on both the ends. One weapon and the world is over. Okay, that is it. The Russians have something called the dead man switch, which I've covered in one of my channels, one of my videos. It's the world is over. So I don't think it'll reach that far. It's only these damn Pakistanis who brandish the nuclear weapons as fools, if I may. The threat, okay, Ukraine is a pawn. Absolutely agree with you, Sanjeev Saab, and feel sad for the people of Ukraine. Russia will not leave until its objectives are met. Well, so how long is this war going to last? As per Vladimir Putin, last week he said it's going to take time. Chinese bot को डराओ मत आदि सर. सर आजकल तो चाइनीज बॉट पीछे पड़े रहते हैं. यहाँ की इधर उधर की मेल्स आती हैं सेइंग भैया यू ओ $1,000 here, $1,000 there. I don't know from where all I keep getting these damn things. What can India gain from this war apart from cheap fuel? India has actually gained a lot in terms of its diplomatic heft. And let me also tell you that a lot of the Russian military equipment which is being used in Africa and many other countries, because India stays quiet about these things, and you must, because it's a little touchy. The Russians have indirectly asked the Indians to do a lot of the servicing for all that equipment. It is for a certain reason that a lot of the Western countries were not there during the DEF Expo. A lot of the focus was on African countries. So there's a lot to gain. We've gained a certain market. There's a lot which has happened, and as far as the world weight is concerned, I think India has gained a lot in terms of its diplomatic heft. It could be next India also, sir. It could be next anyone. The Americans could actually switch over to themselves. Remember Black Lives Matter, so I think it'll be Pakistan. Well, let's see. Let's hope not. There is a lot of conferences going on in the European Union on Indo-Pacific, China, USA, but none has the appetite to come to Asia. They don't want to ruin the economic ties with China. Of course, yes. Why do you think Olaf Scholz was the second head of state after Shahbaz Sharif to meet Xi Jinping? There's a reason. Because German cars sell in China. And Germany is in deep trouble. So he will run to China and say, Ji saab, bolo saab, kya chahiye saab? France, till some time ago, had said, I don't have a border with China, so I don't have a fight with it. This is Macron, by the way. It tells you. Any comments of Russia-China relationship, any impacts for India? See, Russia-China is a very, very relative relationship at the point of time. They both need each other at this point of time. Please understand, India will not stand with Russia the way China is. They will not do it. Our relationship is much deeper than what the Chinese have with Russia. Let me give you a small example, and I think I want to say this second time on my channel. The Russians and the Chinese have 7,700 territorial disputes between them. Even they have fought a war, right? The Russians obliterated the Chinese in that war in 1969. So there is no love lost there. There is no love lost at all. They need each other. And this is a relationship of convenience. None of these guys would want to be the second fiddle to anyone else. You think Vladimir Putin will say, यार मैं China का ना मैं Xi Jinping का number 2 बन जाता हूँ, or Xi Jinping will say that I will be the second hedge to Vladimir Putin? No, it's not going to happen. This is a relationship of convenience. Ukraine isn't getting into the EU. Trust me, they don't want to pay for all the tab that will come out of the reconstruction of Ukraine. Ukraine is deployed completely, and Western countries will throw them under the bus. That's what history says, sir. So yeah, you might be absolutely right. The left cabal is completely captured by the Ukrainian Union Commission, the European Union Commission, sorry, where individual countries are helpless except Hungary. When gas flow declines in pipelines, there is a whole different game. Well, Croatia has done some stuff. There's some countries that are going to come out and say enough. But yeah, that'll take some time. It will take some time. There's just no question about it. It's Putin versus the global deep state. I have no proof, but yeah, it looks like it. Europe is just another colony with the USA with limited freedom, and that's the interference Merkel's statement gives to others. Well, yes, sir, there is a lot with regards to what happens in Europe and how USA kind controls it. Remember, USA is not a member of the EU, but they have an honorary person sitting there. I don't know what he's doing. Of course, controlling whatever it is. What do you think of the CIA praising Modi? देखो साहब, they have to sell a story. ठीक है? They have to also sell a story to the Indians. Modi Saab, I don't know what he said to Putin in personal, but I don't think Putin is mad enough of actually using a nuclear weapon, because at the end of it, a single nuclear weapon will cause a global catastrophe. Markets will crash, everything will be down the tube. And today, if India is silently supporting Russia, would you think any country in the world would support Russia after that? No. So, using nuclear weapons by Putin in this war would be madness. That's what I think. Morality, or put in another way, conformism. Absolutely, ma'am. I, I agree with you, my way or the highway. Absolutely. And you say this, anybody who doesn't confirm is a bad guy. I say it out loud or not. Absolutely. There's no question. That's how it is. Guys, 1 minute, 1 hour and 10 minutes. I'm going to take just two more questions and close this particular discussion. Otherwise, can go on all night. Otherwise, I noticed Modi made great relations with the Gulf countries, and now Xi Jinping will go to Saudi Arabia soon. How do you think this will affect India-China relations? Uh, I won't want to call your name out on the on the show, but let's just keep it to the subject. Honestly, it's a fragile thing. Uh, the Middle East is also showcasing their relation with China towards USA. That's all I'll say at the moment. Let's keep it to subject. I will be discussing India China in the future. Please do join us then, and we will talk about it. Mr. Venkatesh, to discuss economy. Thank you so much for the recommendation, sir. To add to your comment, 7,000 plus disputes, by the way, China and Russia. Most of Russian nuclear missiles are border facing China. The Chinese even keep 150 odd aircraft ready and willing for the Russians. Uh, Guys, Anjan Das Saab, first time your question has been responded in a live chat. I always try and respond to as many as possible, Mr. Anjan. That's how I want to keep my viewers as long as I can. If I have the capability, and if I'm with a guest, I can't alone. I try and take as many as questions as possible, so that I feel connected to everybody here. It's kind of rhetoric. World, EU plus US wanted to see the next big war in Asia. They got Arctic. Yeah, absolutely. uh, Transnistria is a region which is in the northern part of Moldova. Okay, these guys, it's also known as Piednistrovia, right? They have their own flag, currency, and stuff like that, and they still have those CCCP, the Soviet kind of system, and about, I think, 8,000 troops which are based there. No, that's not the place I was talking about. It is a place which is combined. It's erstwhile Romania combined with Moldova. It used to be known something. I'm really sorry. It's slipping my mind. I will probably add it in the comments here and there. Thanks for the try, though. Adil Saab, thank you so much. You've been here after a long time. Excellent session. Thank you so much, guys. I think I'm going to sign off. I am throat is tired now after talking for an hour, 12 minutes. Thank you so much for joining in. It feels great that all you guys are here listening to what I have to say and being so participative in this discussion. Of course, I keep getting comments even after the video goes live on the session, and it's really nice to hear all your suggestions. I try and respond it. I can't do it every day, but I try and respond as much as I can. Uh, Thanks, guys. Please do check. Make sure that you touch that little thumbs up, so that it encourages me to know that more and more people are liking my video. Please do keep commenting, even when the video is live and you watch it later. And yes, please spread the word about Dev Talks. I'm at 7,200, 300 followers right now. Need to get to the next level of 10,000. Help me out getting there, guys, so that we can do a better show and put great and the correct narrative out into the Indian geopolitical environment. Please do contribute to the Dev Talks efforts by becoming a member or sending us some super stickers or super chats, or you can directly contribute, as a lot of you have, towards my UPI with the number mentioned below. Till next time, guys, tomorrow is Wednesday. Most likely, we will have General Shankar with us. See you then. Jai Hind.